Hi, this is my review for the Ligny and Wavre 1815, the Empire's Last Victories wargame. It is part of the Days of Glory game system that I have reviewed in the past. The designer is Frederick Bay. The artwork is by Pascal da Silva, and it's a Canon Carton game. So first off, before we talk about the mechanics of the game and how this game played out, we'll have a look at the components, and then I'll talk about some of the scenarios that I've played with the game and the things I like about it. So as you can see, I've got the game set out. This is for the Ligny scenario. It's the setup for the historical scenario. The map's a paper map. The artwork is beautiful. I really do love the artwork of the maps of this series. It's one of the things I like about the game a lot. It's got a very readable visual language, so you can clearly see, you know, where the towns are, where the wooded areas are, the different elevations of the hill. Beautifully done, and you know, a real joy to play on. In the video, I've set this up directly on the map. It's a paper map, so I would normally play with Plexi, but because I was filming it, I knew because of the glare not to do that. So I set it on paper, but would recommend Plexi. The counters, very nicely done, very nicely done. They generally speaking have several different types of artwork. So if it's a foot counter, an infantry counter, it will it's pretty bespoke artwork per counter. I couldn't swear that every single counter has its own piece of art. It feels like it, I'll be honest with you. And generally speaking, for the counters that are actually on the map, you've got foot, artillery and horse. Again, all beautifully illustrated, really nice. The readability of the counters is really high, really good. So this is an example. This is a formation here, French formation. They've kind of got this pinkish, I'll call it, bar at the top to show that they're all in the same formation. There's a separate formation there with the black, and you can just see in the camera another formation there in the green. There's a good language between the two sides, so you can clearly see you know, the differentiate between the two sides, even though they have the same you know, they have the same counter layout, so that's easy for the game. The readability of the counters in terms of the mechanics is very high. There aren't too many stats on the counters, and really nicely laid out. One of the great things about this game, and I'll mention it several times in this review, is that this is a game series. So this isn't the only game in the series. I reviewed another one of the games in the series, Canon, from the same publisher, Canon and Carton. There are a few publishers that have published games in this series. Recently, C3I magazine had a game in this series. And once you've learnt the rules for the game, by and large, with the odd exception specific to the battle, then, you know, away you go. And so the readability of the counters is consistent basically throughout the games. Really nice. You will need a couple of D10s. It's a D10 system that it uses. I borrowed those from another game. I couldn't tell you which one. And then there are a few other sort of gameplay orientated counters that have a, you know, a very different colour, so there's no confusion. But the counters punch out really nice. I've clipped them. You don't need to. What I would say is that, and this seems to be greatly discussed on the Facebook post I put about this, is that the counters are not the biggest, and the hexes are not the biggest, and as you can see, sometimes they can be quite closely packed together. So I use the tweezers. You don't need to use the tweezers, but I don't know, I just like it, using the tweezers. It's not a mega stacking game. So, for example, somewhere there's a few, there's only in shot actually, I think maybe just here, there's a stack of 3 counters, but mostly speaking, it's 1 or 2 counters on the stacks. I can't think of a case where I've ever seen, yeah, occasionally you'll get a 4 stack, there'll be maybe 2 infantry, an artillery, and a light infantry counter to make a stack of 4. But that's rare, to be honest with you. Mostly you're playing with single counters or doubles, so it's not a mega stacking game. So let's have a look at the rule book. It's not too many pages long. The rule book, I'm not sure what this version is actually, but this is a fairly recent publication in this series, so it's a pretty up-to-date rule book. Obviously, this has one of the advantages of these rules have been iterated on over the course of the development of this game, ongoing development of this game. The rules are really nicely laid out, very clear sections. Obviously this is a French game, so it's an English translation. The translation is absolutely first class. I didn't encounter any single thing in the rules that I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit of a kooky way of describing the English or the rules or anything like that. It goes through each sort of part of the game painstakingly. It is a game, well, I would say it is a game that you have to read the rules before you start playing. I can't imagine getting this game out, laying it out, and then starting to play and read the rules at the same time. And maybe it's just the way I play war games. I have played war games that way, but I think this is a game where it's better to study or read through the rulebook a couple of times, then put some counters out, try out the combat mechanics, for example, the activation mechanics, the cavalry mechanics, and so forth. But really nice laid out. There are some examples of play. For example, is a cavalry charge example of play that's super useful. So there are a few of those. In terms of scenarios, so this is a dual kind of battle, if that's the right word, game. The mock-up, the example that I had laid out in the previous sort of shot was Ligny. On the flip side of the map is Wavre. For Ligny, I think there are 2 scenarios. I've only played the historical scenario a few times. There is a what if Ligny scenario, and in looking at the text in bold, that scenario is the same as the historical one, but with the entire French corps rather than them coming through reinforcements. So you've got 2 Ligny scenarios, 2 Wavre scenarios. Interestingly, there's also a Waterloo scenario, but to play that you'll need the Waterloo game in the series. I think it's, yeah, you'll need the Quatre-Bras and Waterloo 1815 game, which is in the series, to be able to play that. So if you don't have that, you've still got 4 scenarios, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a second. And then there's some errata for the Quatre-Bras scenario. So rule page count in total, not including the scenarios, you're at about 14 pages. Sort of feels right. Like I said, the rules, because they've been, I mean, it's a great set of rules. Honestly, read through them several times. I've played quite a few games in this series now, and sometimes I've had a gap of time between playing the game, so I'll just skim through the rules again and go, oh, yeah, I remember how you do that. Remember how you do that. They're really not very, 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 very well written, very clear. And you can tell they've been iterated on and made clearer over time, I would say. In fact, actually, the rules actually start on page 3, so it's a little bit less of the rules than I even mentioned. So yeah, great components, absolutely great. So just before we talk about some of the gameplay elements that I really enjoy in this game, you also get a player aid. You will need this a lot. You will be using the player aid quite a lot, and the reason you'll need the player aid is because it has the few charts that you will need all the time through the game, and they are predominantly the and I go in sort of my order as I would refer to them. Firstly is the artillery, because of the game structure of the turn you'll be using artillery. So you have your artillery charts, you have your charge charts, and your shock, which is basically what I would call sort of close combat you know, one counters of infantry fighting against other of the opponent. On the flip side of the charts, on the player age, you've got your terrain effects. Terrain effects, very straightforward, very straightforward. In fact, to be honest with you, generally speaking, with this game, once you've kind of learned the main ones, which you'll have down in a couple of turns, you probably won't hardly refer to the terrain effects. It's mostly using the tables, and even then you'll kind of work out the common dice roll that you'll be needing to have really any impact on the game, especially for example with the artillery. The artillery starts with a 9, so you're you know, with the modifiers you'll work it out pretty quickly. So use this quite a lot, but it's a very simple laid out. One of the things that's unusual, I guess, for some wargamers will be that the player aid is in French and English. So even though it's a sheet here, half of it is irrelevant if you only speak one language. I don't speak or read French, so of this table here, for example, this is the French version of that table. So you're only ever going to be referring to this table. So in terms of gameplay, as I said, this I've set up for Ligny 1815. Of the two battles, Ligny and Wavre, this is the main battle, I'll call it. This is the biggest battle of the two. To give you some sense, I'm just going to pan out slowly a little bit of the map. As you can see, the footprint of this game is a little bit smaller than a lot of games. It's one of the appealing things about it for me. That's not to suggest that there's not great sense of movement in the battle, and that's not to suggest that this game is a oversimplification of Napoleonics, because it's not. It's just a smaller footprint game. Now in this battle, Ligny, I've played it quite a few times now. I'll be honest with you, I've only played this game solitaire. I find Days of Glory system solitaires really well. It's got a lot of great mechanics that enable it to be solitaire friendly. It is not a solitaire game. It has not got an AI system or any game engine like that. It's just that I found playing it solitaire to be a lot of fun, very fulfilling, and a really engaging Napoleonics experience. So, as it's set up at the moment, the French they will get reinforcements. The Prussians, I don't think they get any reinforcements in this particular scenario. So the French are going to, generally speaking, they're going to have a harder time of it, and they're very much on the offensive. The Prussians, the defensive, I'll say, but I've played it a few times now, where certainly these formations at the top here have been able to come around here and engage with the French in a much more offensive way, which has been a great experience. What I would say with the battle is that because of some of the mechanics, and probably now's the time to talk about some of the mechanics that I enjoy before I talk about the sort of conclusions of the battle. So, things I like about the game system. One, it's got a chit pull mechanic. Down here in the bottom here are the activation chits, I'll call them. You put them in a cup, you take them out, and you can activate the formation of that colour. So if you pull out this one here has got a green band on it, you look for this, the green formation there, you can activate the formation in essence. However, it also has a deeper mechanic where you, at the start of the turn, you give your formations order counters. So if I gave that one an order counter, I could activate them and they could move and they could fight and all that sort of stuff. But you don't have enough of those to give all your different formations an order counter. So you have to pick and choose the formations that you think will be the best use in that particular time. But formations that don't have an order counter can still be activated. There's a simple die roll mechanic to see if they'll activate, or you can activate them but they're less effective, so they don't move as far, and they have to take more dice rolls before to engage in combat, and that kind of mechanics. And just that idea I found super engaging, and I really enjoyed that, so that you have that when you're playing the game, you have that randomness as to which formation is going to be activated. Interestingly, with this game, depending on the scenario you play, each formation may have several activation chits. So in this scenario, pretty sure all the formations have 2 activation chits. So every turn they're going to activate potentially twice. Now that does mean I think there's 16 activation chits per side for this scenario. That means you're going to have 32 activations per turn, and this particular scenario is a 6-turn scenario. So the game length of this scenario is much longer than the Wavre scenario that I've covered in other videos. But just that mechanic of the chip pool combined with the orders makes you pause before, at the start of the turn, think about as a commander what you think who you want to activate, who can't be activated, because even if you want to activate certain formations, if they're too far away from your army general, or call him, so there's Blucher, there's Napoleon down here, you won't be able to give them orders, etc. So that mechanic is quite involving, and it's quite in depth, certainly a lot more in depth than I've just described it very briefly this there, but it's incredibly satisfying and super engaging. The actual movement, the combat mechanics are super streamlined. So it enables you to focus on the decision making rather than page turning and keep referring to the rules for how the actual combat works. By and large, the combat, the normal mechanics of wargaming apply, and they're super streamlined. Like I said, this is it's not one of those games where you can keep having to refer to the rulebook and go, oh, how does that work? I can't remember. That's super cool. What is important, I think, for this game is that command decision process that I really enjoy. And I love the fact you cannot give all your formations the orders. It means they will not be able to do, you will not be able to do all the things you would possibly want to do in this kind of bird's eye sort of semi-god view of the battlefield, which is one of the things I love about it. And it makes it very solitaire friendly because of that chip pool. So you would put these in the cup, pull them out. There are some special activation chits that enable you to do special things. I won't go into too much detail about those, but the rules explain them really well. It's a pretty straightforward game. So in this particular scenario, how I've played it a few times now, the French try and use their elite troops down here and push into the centre here to take Ligny. They're trying to move around to the flanks. The Prussians are able to come around and engage them in this way. It almost, last time I played this fairly recently, the game seesawed like this, so that it started off pretty much, in this sort of sense, and towards the end, the whole thing had moved around almost like this, with the French almost coming into trying to take Ligny slightly from the north. And they had a hard time of it and were able to take it. And this side, the French completely lost, and the Prussians were able to come around. It was super engaging, very enjoyable game. The other scenarios, the Wavre scenarios, which I have covered a couple of times in a couple of other videos, so again, a lot less counters than this setup, but still those fundamental mechanics still hold up, even with a much lower counter density type game. And I really enjoyed all the scenarios in this game. What I think is great about this is the value for money. This is not an expensive game. I purchased this from Second Chance Games here in the UK. I paid less than £30 for it. It is a folio game, so it doesn't come with a box. You do need a couple of dice, as I've explained, but for less than £30 you've got 2 really different battles. And if you haven't watched my other videos on Wavre, which is the flip side of this map, then please do so. But 2 very different sort of historical battles. This game took, this is kind of like a 4+ hours game for this battle. The other one probably could be done, I think I played it on the Wavre the last time in an evening, so once you've got the system down, the mechanics understood, and it is a streamlined game, and then it can be played in that amount of time. Solitaires very well, beautiful components. The mechanics are straightforward. So one of the things I want to stress upon, and I can't stress upon enough, is that again, because it's a smaller footprint game, and I'll describe the mechanics as streamlined and thought through. That's not to say this is a. I'll be honest. This is not a new. I'm new to wargaming. I'm new to Napoleonics game, in my opinion. I do play some Napoleonics games with either younger gamers or gamers who are not so familiar with wargame paper, hex counter wargames. I wouldn't play this with them to start with, and it's because it has quite a few steps to the mechanics. So even giving the orders, there's quite a few processes you have to go through that I don't think. I think there are other games that don't have that are more suitable for a newcomer to war games. So it's not, in my opinion, my humble opinion, it's not an introductory war game. And I think sometimes when people see these folio games, they see this smaller map and they think, oh, it's too simple. It's not. It really isn't. It is I would describe it as certainly a medium complexity Napoleonics game. It has a huge amount of depth to it. A lot of, as you can see from the setup, this is a game that wants to be played. And I mean, set it up today for the video, I kind of want to play it again because there's so many options to you as the player. And because the rules are streamlined, you can focus on that strategy and trying out different strategies for different outcomes, and just get on and play the game, which is great. So to wrap up, excellent value for money. You're getting two great, very different battles for the price of a game that is certainly here in the UK. It's easily less than half the price of a big boxed war game. Once you have this system learned, it's very straightforward to go from one battle to the other, collect the other games in the series. I will admit therein lies some of the challenge of this game series. Some of the games are not in print. A lot of them are part of the Victis magazine, so they're in French, but you can download the scenarios in English, etc. So it's going to take it requires a little bit more work, I suppose, tracking down some of the games. Some of them are in print though, and you can buy them directly from the publishers. So great value for money, great components, really thought through, brilliantly written rule book. The rules all make sense. The one rule that I have a few house rules over is probably although I won't go into too much detail, but the cavalry pursuit rule, where you can sometimes find, this historically has happened on occasion, the cavalry counters, once they start beating another counter and it's retreating, they're chasing it and they're chasing it and they're chasing it. I have a few house rules that I apply to that, but hey, that's just the way I play it. So overall, yeah, highly recommended. Beautiful game. Love the game series. Love the fact it's a nice, manageable footprint game. Solitaires brilliantly well, and because of the chip pool, the other thing I should say as well, I have played it over the course of a week, and it's brilliant for that because you can pull out a chip, activate a formation, do that formation, walk away from the game, get on with the rest of your life of doing whatever you do, and then come back to it, and it's brilliant for that. So yeah, highly recommended if you've got an interest in Napoleonics, or you've played a few introductory Napoleonics games and you want something a bit more in-depth, a bit more historical, then I highly recommend this series. I've thoroughly enjoyed this game and thoroughly enjoyed both the scenarios. That's pretty much it for me, so thank you for watching.